All right, welcome to MythVision podcast. We are live. I have Dr. Adair joining us. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great here. Glad to be part of it.
I am too. I figure, man, we're going to talk about the star, so I might as well use the intro that seems to have planetary analogous. It's in the vein. So here we go. We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision podcast. We're about to kick some butt with this book here, The Star of Bethlehem, A Skeptical View. Dr. Adair, if I may, I almost want to read this blurb at the beginning. It's actually past the blurb. About the author, if I may, because you have never been interviewed by yourself on my channel with like just having you on. And so you're coming through way cleaner right now too. So since we hit record, the gods have looked out for us. Okay. All before this live, like you've been blurry, and I'm like, please don't be blurry. So
it's also maybe a little bit frightening if I'm here alone. I need to be supervised. I'm very dangerous.
I can tell. I can actually see it. It's insane, man. Calm down. No, I'm just kidding. About the author, Adair, and I must bring it up so everybody's being teased with the book. Adair is a recent PhD in physics, and may not be so recent anymore, from the Ohio State University, primarily working in the area of physics education research, PER. Previously, he studied physics, astronomy, and mathematics at Michigan State University. His scientific interests have included working as a show presenter at a planetarium, researching at the SETI, S-E-T-I Institute, and examining parts of the Atlas particle detector at CERN, C-E-R-N. His current areas of research are technological innovations in the classroom, project-based learning curricula, the origins of physics misconceptions, the history of astronomy and classical history and religions. He has published on the Star of Bethlehem previously in Sky and Telescope and Zygon, Journal of Science and Religion. Born and raised in Michigan, Aaron currently resides in Columbus, Ohio, but he is on the move to where no one knows except God. Do you still blog at Gilgamesh 12 or 42 WordPress.com?
Yeah, I still have my blog there, but it's been about a year since I've published anything on it. So I'm very much inactive on blogging. And in the 8 years since the book has come out, I have moved to a place I do know. I'm currently outside of Ohio and living in the Boston area. A lot has happened in that time. Fortunately, mostly good things.
Good. The book is not very thick. It really isn't. Anyone should be able to read through this. Just barely scratches 100, 125, 127 pages or so, approximately in that region. Get you a copy. It is in the description. I did pin it in the comment section. I will come back to this towards the end of this episode. If you want someone who's sharp, who's educated, who knows a thing or two about astronomy, the stars, and all that kind of stuff, this is the guy. So Dr. Adair, I'm seriously thankful for you joining us today. Why did you write this book? What is the motivation behind this?
So I first came to this subject because of my previous work at the planetarium at Michigan State. I was lucky enough to be a show presenter there my freshman year of college, and learned that during the holiday time there was a particular kind of show that this planetarium and most planetariums around the U.S. would show that was holiday themed, that would also try to explain the seasons, what's important in the night sky, and also part of the Christmas story with astronomy. And when I first learned about this was at a time when I was still religious. Basically, I called myself a Catholic deist at the time. And when I saw the stars come together and form something to explain this story from the Gospel of Matthew, I was just like, this is how God should be operating. This is beautiful, wonderful. And then I went home, and on television, they had a program on the same subject, and they were presenting a different theory. And then I realized this rabbit hole is pretty darn deep, and I better start digging.
Wow, I'm just going through the chat, letting everybody know we are we are aware that you are there. Don't worry, and we do care. So thank you, everybody who's joining in. Hit that like button as you come in. So technically, to put it simple, there was not just I'm going to debunk, because this is a skeptical view. It was kind of trying to affirm, in a sense, is this true? You were really on your own journey in a way of trying to say, like, is there really something to this, right?
Yeah. I had the question as of what does the text actually say, and what can we justify historically, whether that it's a complete miracle story, but it absolutely happened because it's the gospel truth, versus it was something completely naturalistic, but then was construed into something else, or it was some later event that was just then superimposed into the past by the author, or straight up literary creation, or maybe something completely different. So I started digging with that and finding out what did and didn't fit, found out what arguments existed out there, which ones were good, not so good, and some that you wouldn't even make if you could actually read the text for what it actually says. There have been many a times where I've come across where people make arguments and make claims about the original Greek that are not just wrong, but logically impossible.
Really? Okay, so we'll probably get into some of these. Anyone who's interested, he has a website as well. And if you go here, you are promised wings in the afterlife. So be sure to go check out his website, click on all the stuff. I mean, he is definitely a science nerd, if I could use the term. You know what you're talking about when it comes to this stuff. So I also have the Patreon in case you are interested in being deified or forgiven for any transgressions. Trust me, I have the capability and power. So help us at MythVision continue doing what we do. All right, Dr. Adair, from what I understand, and I'm my good friend Neil has already interviewed you on this, but what is going on with the star? Maybe a good place to start is the Star of Bethlehem. Rather than just asking that anachronistically, we need to get back into the worldview a little. Like, why does a star even matter? Why isn't this tree grew or something? Like, what is the significance in the ancient world with celestial phenomena like a star? And how do we know that that carries any significance at first? That might be the first thing we need to do, is break down that for our audience.
Right. So since, time immemorial, it seems that the sky was a place where the gods were doing all sorts of activities, whether they lived there or put signs in the skies. You see right in Genesis that the sun, moon, and stars are put there for signs and seasons, somehow signaling to the rest of the world, hey, you better be watching out. You better be paying attention, whether it's following the festivals or watching something a little more apocalyptic coming. So that is the worldview that you find, not just in the Old Testament, but in many other ancient Near Eastern cultures, in Greco-Roman culture, and of course, when it comes to the motions of the planets, that was becoming particularly of interest to the Romans at around the same time the Gospels and the first Christians are growing. Basically, astrology starts becoming a boom industry and become politically important during the reign of Caesar Augustus, and then just, holds on for a long time. Occasionally the emperors would expel the astrologers because, they don't want them saying anything bad about the emperor, but, still keep the court astrologers so that way, their advice can keep being whispered in their ear. So yeah, in this time, the belief that the signs either were causes or signs of things to come.
And some of those signs, correct me if I'm wrong, a star, for example, it would signify the birth or death of a king or someone who's noble, someone who's in a high rank official, someone who's a powerful person, oftentimes even becomes a deification signal, right? Like they became the celestial being. So there's this idea that when you became a god, you literally became one of the twinkle, twinkle, little star. How I wonder what you are up above the sky so high, like a diamond in the sky. They became the stars, right?
At least for the most honorable of people. So, for example, Julius Caesar, upon his death, there was about a week or so later seen a comet in the sky, and depending on if you were pro-Caesar or anti-Caesar, you either said this was a comet and this is terrible news for Rome, or you were claiming this star is actually Caesar's soul rising into the heavens and carried up specifically by his ancestor, the goddess Venus.
We know that's true, though. I mean, that's right? Like,
well, unlike many other alleged stars, we actually have recordings of this not just in Roman sources, but in Chinese. So we can be much more sure there definitely was a star or a comet seen in the sky at that time. Or somehow Caesar Augustus sent a mission to China and ran there as fast as he could to say, add this to your history books because we're going to need this later, okay?
That's interesting. So I get the impression that you're going to take quite a different take about this particular star that we call the Star of Bethlehem, that signified the birth of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, named Jesus. But before we do, and we're going to get your presentation here, I've got one super chat already I'd like to get, and then let's roll with the punches. Doc Pleuromonaut, always coming in with something way over my head. Thank you for the support. Roman response to Persian political figures coming to one of their client kingdoms to establish another ruler begs questioning. Magi did not have the astrological tradition until centuries later.
Okay, apparently you've already read my book. There you go. Presentation over. Doc Romer's already pointed out two major problems.
Have a nice day, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll see you next time.
Yeah, we were MythVision, but now we done.
We is done, and thanks a lot, though. Seriously, Doc, appreciate the support. All right, Aaron, I'm going to go ahead and add your slides to the screen. And at any point, anyone who has a super chat or whatever, I will be more than happy to find a place that fits. Hopefully, it's in the vein of the discussion. If it's not in the vein of the discussion and it's something that doesn't go in with what you're discussing, I'll just hold it till the end and be reminded to get to it. So here we are.
So I think if we're going to be talking about something related to astronomy and the sciences, we should have a moment of science. You may have seen this image before. It is called the Pillars of Creation. And you can find this beautiful cloud structure in something known as the Eagle Nebula. If you want to travel there, it's going to take a while. The Eagle Nebula is approximately 5,700 light years away. And these pillars, these almost like, fingers sticking up, are themselves about 4 or 5 light years long. To give a sense of that length, if you were on a probe, and the fastest probe we have ever launched from Earth, it would take you 1,000 lifetimes to traverse that distance. And this beautiful structure is the birthplace of stars like our own sun. The colors here are actually the result of the various elements and just filtering them and overlaying to produce this image. And while this structure is gigantic, it's also extremely tenuous. You can see on the bottom, it looks like something has been blowing on the bottom of it, and it is being blown. There are stars off to the side. The light from them is so bright and intense, it's literally pushing the gas and dust away. This structure that eventually can collapse to form something as firm as the ground here can literally be pushed by a beam of sunlight. This is literally the birthplace of stars, and it is one of many, many fantastic structures in our galaxy. Our galaxy, one of many billions throughout the universe. And we need to look throughout the universe for the possibility of finding just one SOB that we apparently care about.
Well, wow. How many SOBs are there? So interesting. I really do appreciate this is a great term to use. The Star of Bethlehem. So everybody knows from now on to call it an SOB.
Now, I should point out that I am not the person who came up with this moniker. This is actually somewhat common parlance amongst planetarium operators, that this is known as the SOB on the back end. I've confirmed that with my previous workers, and I've also confirmed this also with the Neil deGrasse Tyson, that, yeah, this is a common, not so kind moniker, and we're going to discuss why that is amongst planetarium operators later on, actually. But obviously, it's supposed to represent the Star of Bethlehem, of which we have one major source, and all the rest seem to be riffing off it from our friend, the Gospel of Matthew. So, everyone, let's pull out your Bibles and give it a read. Nice, easy reading.
Oh, wow. Okay.
All right.
Let me call somebody.
All right. So if you get any translation, King James, what have you, they'll be all similar enough. I have my own translation in the book, and it's very similar to all the major translations out there. Just for right now, I'll highlight the main things. One is that it's noting that during the reign of Herod the Great, a group of people called the Magi, the Magi from the east, come saying, hey, we're looking for the king of the Jews. We saw his star. There's this phrase that, only contentious phrase in translation, ente anatole. Old translations say in the east. More modern ones will say at the rising. But they're saying, hey, we saw this star at its rising in the east. We've come to worship him. Herod's like, but wait, I'm the king. Problems ensue. He, inquires with the chief priest. He inquires with the Magi about the timing of the star. Says, hey, go find this newborn king. Come back so that I may worship him. And of course, when Herod is saying that, you have to imagine him twirling his mustache as sinisterly as possible. Magi go out, they say, and lo and behold, the star which they had seen before at its rising went before them until it came and stood over the place where the child was. Come to the place, they're super happy, come in, see Mary and Jesus, give gifts, have a dream, and then get the heck out of Dodge. That's all we basically have for the story.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, we're supposed to reconstruct all the stars in the sky. So, most of this stuff, most of the terms, the story points, we're probably all familiar with from pageant plays and things like that, but I will right now highlight one group in particular, maybe less familiar. This group known as the Magi, often translated the wise men in the King James translation. This term magos or magos in Greek, what are they supposed to be? The most common way that they are interpreted as they are members of the Zoroastrian priesthood coming from Persia. You can actually see this, for example, in this mosaic. Above, you can see the traditional names to the three Magi, Balthazar, Melchior, and Gaspar. And yes, Gaspar with a G. Later it becomes Casper because somebody misread a G for a C.
Wow.
Yeah, so, typos, it's how we get, true religious knowledge. But there's a few things here that show that they're supposed to be Persian. Their hat is called a Phrygian cap. The way it kind of flops over is supposed to be traditional for that region. The fact that they're wearing pants, and that's supposed to show that they're horse riders, again, associating them with Persia, the capes as well. These are the sorts of, traditional clothes that Romans would think that the Persians would be wearing. And if you really wanted to confirm they were Persian, we could go check their bones. This image here is actually a reliquary in Cologne, Germany, in the cathedral there, and allegedly inside are the bones of the three wise men, dug up by Queen Helena, the mother of Constantine.
I mean, the level at which she went to try and validate or maybe, hey, Bobby, I have 1,000 denarii if you can find Peter's ankle bone. And they're going, I can find that. Don't worry. I'll be right back. Go to the local cemetery. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Somehow there's a legend that allegedly the Magi would come every year back to the place of Jesus's life. And eventually when they would die there, they would all be buried together. So when Helena came to the Holy Land, she just happened to find the right tomb with their three bodies on top of each other. On the other hand, Marco Polo claims that he saw their bodies on display south of modern-day Tehran. So who are you going to believe?
Good point.
Yeah, but nonetheless, they're supposed to be these Persian folks, and lots of legends of where their bones or their bodies are supposed to be. Specifically, Marco Polo said he saw their bodies and their beards not decaying. So I guess if we really wanted to reconcile, those are their skin and beard, but the bones were left behind, and that's what Helena took. If we try, we can reconcile.
Anything's possible.
Oh yes. Yeah, and there's of course been tons of artwork. Perhaps one of the very famous paintings of the nativity story is from the early 14th century Italian painter Giotto. We've probably seen this on Christmas cards and elsewhere. And besides, the loving scene of, the wise men coming to honor the baby Jesus, you can see right above there something swooping in. And it looks a little bit different than some of the other traditional cars. This one looks very much like a comet. It's
Yeah.
often supposed that this was actually Halley's comet that was seen just a couple years before this painting was made. And so he was trying to more accurately represent a comet in here to show as the Star of Bethlehem. This painting was so famous when Halley's comet came back in 1986. There was a probe that would go and track along and go into the tail of the comet to measure the materials coming off, and they named that probe Giotto after this painting and the artist. Now, many also will suppose, the reason Giotto painted the Star of Bethlehem as a comet because he secretly believed, or not so secretly believed, that the Star of Bethlehem really was a comet, a completely naturalistic object. I'm not an art historian, but I was able to do just enough art history to undermine that, because very often an artist will paint the same scene, especially a biblical scene, more than once. So from him or his studio, there are two other later paintings. And as I show here, one from Assisi, one from Florence, the star doesn't look quite like a comet anymore. On the right, you also see a beam coming down from heaven shining down. And on the left, something a little bit more wispy, but you also see it's in front of a mountain. It's, much closer to Earth. So if Giotto thinks it's a comet, he changed his mind very quickly.
What is it? Is it an angel, or is it a spirit coming down or something?
Well, this can actually be explained as better if we look at some of the examples that Giotto was probably influenced by in Byzantine art.
Okay.
So, for example, this is a few centuries earlier from a church not too far away from the Hagia Sophia in modern-day Istanbul, back then Constantinople. And in the middle, you can see Mary laying down. Behind her is the manger with baby Jesus, and this beam from heaven shining down, basically acting as a giant indicator of where the baby Jesus is born. And this is traditional Byzantine art. You find it also in more modern Eastern Orthodox art. Russian icons use the same sort of I call beam of Bethlehem to highlight where you're going to find Jesus. And occasionally you'll see it in modern movies as well.
Mm.
So I find that in the various ancient commentaries, the medieval commentaries, the artistic representations, the star is some sort of wonderful magical object, perhaps controlled directly by God or an angel of some sort. But then we started doing this whole thing called science and discovering that it seems like the universe runs on natural laws. And if you believe in the laws of nature, where do miracles fit into that? And that tension we start seeing happening basically just after the time of Newton. Newton himself was a believer in miracles, but everyone started realizing, hey, if this is how the universe operates, then where does God come into play? Does God make the most wonderful clock in the universe and then mess around with it? That didn't seem to start making sense. So I need to introduce you to two figures that you've probably not have heard of, but are instrumental to the change happening. On the left is an English gentleman by the name of Thomas Woolston. He was trained as a priest. He went to Cambridge just like Newton did, and he became obsessed with allegorical readings of the Old and New Testament, especially the New, and basically started writing these pamphlets that was decrying all the miracle stories, all the amazing stuff from the New Testament, not actually real, not historical. He basically called the Star of Bethlehem a fairy tale in slightly indirect language. And this got him into trouble. And when I say trouble, I mean he literally went to jail.
Yeah, that happened a lot, I think, from some, not a lot, but I mean, there were some people getting in prison for making some crazy notions for the time. I think was it a presbyter? I can't remember. He wrote The Devil's Pulpit.
I forget his name, but I think he's 19th century, so a little bit after.
Okay, way after then. Okay, never mind. These are the OGs of getting burned alive type people. Okay, cool.
Yeah. He was also probably one of the last people to even be arrested for these sorts of things. There was already pushes to be more religiously tolerant, especially because of writings by John Locke arguing that it's politically smart to be religiously tolerant. Also because he was trying to protect his friend Isaac Newton, who wasn't a Trinitarian, which technically was a capital offense at the time.
Yeah.
So
Man,
so Locke was like, okay, we could either be really strict and lose the greatest mind in the last 1,000 years, or we can handle a debate.
Well, just to give a heads up to Constellation Pegasus, I will get your super chat after, unless we end up getting to a point where it's relevant to the presentation. Trust me, my friend. Yeah, I just figured we get through this presentation that we can do Q&A and let anybody ask whatever they want.
All right. So as far as I can tell, Woolston is the first person, at least in the Christian world, to basically deny the historicity of that story. And he would influence many of the later English deists, which, of course, would have their work made more philosophically sound by the Scottish philosopher David Hume and his argument against miracles. And the first pushback I can find against this and trying to defend the biblical story of the Bethlehem star as something natural is this gentleman, Johann David Michaelis, who at the time was like the greatest Hebraeus in the European university world. He even like took trips down to Arabia to try to figure out unknown Hebrew terms, help people understand what the Old Testament was saying, though he wouldn't talk to actual Jews because he thought they were somehow corrupted, just, stupid anti-Semitism. But he seems to be the first person to respond to the Dia saying, hey, miracles don't happen, so this story can't be true. His response was, well, we'll explain it with a comet. That's totally natural, so we can believe the story. Hooray. He's basically the start of these sorts of efforts, at least for this particular example, of the various rationalists that would grow up and try to claim so many different things as the Star of Bethlehem. And when I say so many things, I mean literally people have gone around the world to look at records and artifacts to try to figure out how they might either find or explain the Bethlehem story. We have cuneiform tablets from 7 BCE that describe the motions of the planets at that time, so we know literally what the Babylonians were seeing because they wrote it down for us. We have things like, in the middle I'm showing some pages from a collection of Chinese history called the Han Shu, the Book of Han for the Han Dynasty, that was basically roughly contemporaneous with the Roman imperial period. And there was a comet mentioned in 5 BC, what they called a Huixing, a broom star. And some people said, oh, maybe they're talking about the Bethlehem star there. Others have looked to coinage from, like, this is a coin actually from the city of Antioch, and saying, hey, this represents Aries the ram. Maybe this has some connection to what was also going on in the sky, or somehow used to interpret what was happening in the skies, because we could definitely tell they cared about, things of astrological importance. So literally just about everything that's been seen in the sky has been one way or another claimed by somebody to have been the Star of Bethlehem.
I mean, that happens
I am not going to go
often.
Yeah, I am definitely not going to go through all of the candidates. I don't want us to spend all that time there, but amongst the candidates that have been out there, which ones have you heard of, Derek? Which ones are the most familiar flashing in your mind?
In terms of like what fits what happened, you talking about like what is the Star of Bethlehem and how do we know it? Like what candidates?
When I say candidates, like there have been lots of astronomical proposals, some more famous than others. Which ones are you familiar with out there?
I don't know what a name would be, but I've been told that when this happened, supposedly, it comes down to that Kepler quote I was going to bring up. It's in 1604, Kepler observed a new star and believed in the connection to a special and very rare planetary conjunction. After a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, Jupiter met Mars. Kepler speculated the Star of Bethlehem might be a new star, which was generated after a similar conjunction, and recalculated it for 6 to 7 BC. That was the one that I heard. And then I've seen Christian, like I used to work at a Christian bookstore back in the day, and they had all these different DVDs, and there's like 5 or 6 hypotheses of like, they don't even agree with each other, trying to show how this is historically accurate and this is the historicity is true. And there's really this star that we call the Star of Bethlehem. So I don't know if any of those will fit your candidates you have listed, but I don't know.
Oh, no. You are a true prophet, Derek, and you have seen and divined the future. Yes. Yeah, there are various conjunction hypotheses relating to astrology, new stars. I'm only going to talk 2 astronomical hypotheses and one a little bit more out of this world. So the first one, historically, the first one that was tried to use to explain the star is some sort of comet. So a comet is, it's been for a long time called a dirty snowball that has actually now been slightly revised to a snowy dirt ball. But it's primarily a collection of dust and dirt, as well as water ice and dry ice, carbon dioxide ice. It's extremely cold, but once it gets close to the sun, it starts to boil off and throw off debris. That debris becomes the tails of the star, or tails of the comet. And when they're seen in the sky, they can be quite big, beautiful, awe-inspiring, and for many people also scary. A hypothesis that goes back at least to the guy I mentioned, Michaelis, and even more recently, another Bible scholar suggesting that the Star of Bethlehem really was a comet. In fact, the image on the left is taken from the book cover of a recent book. Gentleman's name is Colin Nichols. He, I think, got his PhD from Cambridge in theology, and arguing that basically a comet was doing this and like pretty much pointing out the exact location for where you're going to find a baby Jesus.
That's
Now, the thing is, though, to point out a particular house like this, it takes a little bit of special pleading because, like, for example, the image on the right, you can see many more different houses. So which house is the comet standing over? I can't tell.
Yeah, I mean,
and whatever you say, all you have to do is
standing too. You just
exactly.
move.
Yeah, move your head to the left, and now you have a different baby Jesus. It's like, which Messiah? That one.
Yeah, that's I like that family because they've actually donated sugar and milk when I needed it. So I think their child's chosen.
Yeah, and it is worth noting that without knowing which house to go to, you're going to get the opening scene to Monty Python and the Life of Brian.
Oh, I got to do this then. I got to do this. Just take a second. Here we go. You ready?
Go on! Go and pray someone else's brat. Go on!
We were led by a star.
Led by a bottle of more light. Go on out!
Well, we must see him. We have brought presents.
Out!
Gold, frankincense, myrrh.
Well, why didn't you say he's over there?
Your tiny Jesus, your golden fleece diapers with your tiny little fat balled up fist pawing.
He was a man. He had a beard.
Look, I like the baby version the best. Do you hear me?
Dear 8 pound, 6 ounce, newborn infant Jesus. Don't even know a word yet. Just a little infant, so cuddly, but still omnipotent.
We just thank you for all the races I've won and
All right, enough. I like my little funny intros there. So.
Oh yeah, that is fun. I should actually note, in the earlier drafts of that scene from Monty Python's Life of Brian, they originally were going to have like the Messiah and Brian born like in the same building, and so like the Messiah was in one corner, Brian was in the other, and that's how they got confused.
Oh, they just changed it at the
yeah,
end,
they changed it a bit. So instead, the wise men come out and they see literally the Holy Family glowing in a different location, and then they run back.
Right. That was fun.
Yeah. So yeah, part of my research has been looking at the notes that the troupe left behind about creating these movies. I have the best job in the world. Read Monty Python scripts.
That's the best thing you can do if you want the real gospel.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. But besides not exactly pointing out particular houses and these particular alignments, you'd have to come in at the right direction at the right time and hope there's only one house in the area, which is, I'd say, special pleading in so many ways. The bigger problem that most people will point to is, more often than not, when you see a star in the sky, you don't think the birth of a king. You say somebody is in trouble. So if this is supposed to be leading them to the Messiah, it is very much outside of what is expected. Virtually all ancient cultures would say, you see that in the sky, somebody is dying. The Chinese in particular, they call these comets broom stars because they were supposed to like sweep out the old and bring in the new. So yeah, it is not initially the most accepted hypothesis out there. Most others will point to something instead relating to the planets. And in particular, I want to show something that happened just a little bit more than a year ago, because it was all over the news in late 2020. And it was this particularly close combination of the planets Jupiter and Saturn. We probably already know the planets, how Saturn is the ring planet, Jupiter the largest planet in our solar system, and approximately every 20 years, they will have something called a conjunction, where basically they're close by. This conjunction, though, was really, really close. So close that it might even become hard to distinguish the two. They would get so close together. And this was touted in the media at the time because this was also taking place on December 21st, that closest approach. Oh, it's the Christmas star. And it has this pedigree because it's attached to some of the hypothesizing of the great Johannes Kepler. He is, in many ways, like one of the major founding figures of early modern astronomy. It was his work in the careful observations from another astronomer to come up with the 3 laws of planetary motion. And the real way you made your money as an astronomer at the time is interpreting the heavens, basically doing astrology. In the year 1604, a new star was seen in the sky in the foot of the constellation Ophiuchus, in the foot of the serpent bearer. And, well, if there's a new star, what does that mean? What are the heavens trying to say? So in his text, he is trying to, describe the various observations, be as scientific as possible about when it was seen, how bright it got, how long the brightness lasted, its color, its location, and then going into various interpretations, in particular, interpreting it in light of a system of astrology called the Great Conjunctions. Those conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn every 20 years. They also notice something. This goes all the way back to the late Sassanid period, basically just before the rise of Islam, the realization that, hey, these conjunctions don't just happen every 20 years, but they bounce around in the zodiac in this triangular shape. And they basically bounce around in the same element of signs. And that triangle only slowly seems to rotate. And for it to complete that rotation takes roughly 1,000 years, very, very roughly 900,000 years. And of course, if you believe in millennialism, it's like, wow, there's something in the heavens literally taking a millennium. Okay, something important is happening. Kepler knows this theory. It had been used for centuries before him. And he saw, hey, there was a close conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 1603. And now this star appeared. There's got to be a connection. And then later he also comes across these new arguments arguing that, hey, Jesus wasn't actually born in 1 BC, but born at least 3 or 4 years earlier because of the death of King Herod the Great. He comes across this and then realizes, hey, maybe now we can use this astronomical theory to better date the life of Jesus. And now we can, have it based not just on testimony or a Catholic tradition, which he wouldn't have, had in high esteem. He wasn't a Catholic himself. He was a Lutheran, sort of, but the Lutherans kicked him out for being too heterodox. But nonetheless, he tries applying these theories and comes to argue that in the year 7 BCE, there was not just 1, but 3 conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn, and said, hey, this must have gotten the attention of the wise men from the East. Now, it is worth noting Kepler himself didn't think the Star of Bethlehem was just a new star or one of the planets. He thought it was something miraculous, but this system of astrology helped the wise men to understand and interpret and know why they needed to move, because when these conjunctions happen, it's supposed to be great things. Allegedly, these conjunctions took place like before the Great Flood, before the birth of Moses, before the birth of Muhammad. So there's got to be one just before the birth of Jesus. There's just gotta.
And so the question is, was there?
Well, again, the problem will be, how can you get a conjunction of planets to have the various strange motions that the Bethlehem star has? Again, Kepler himself says explicitly the star that the wise men saw wasn't a comet or the sort of nova that he saw in 1604. He said, no, this was a special miracle wrought by God moving in the lower atmosphere to help point out a particular location on Earth. And basically, this theory was effectively buried for almost 100 plus years. Only like one person I have found actually even responded to it to reject it in the 1650s, 1660s. And then nobody even notices it again until the early 1800s. And then when they dust it off, they leave off the part where Kepler said, by the way, this is totes a miracle. Now, like I say, It also has another problem. The astrological theory that Kepler was using, he knew about it. He knew it came actually from Persian territory, but we also know this theory developed a few centuries after the birth of Christ. So it's very hard to use this astrological theory to interpret the stars if the astrological theory didn't exist. In the same sort of way, when you read the works of Isaac Newton, he doesn't talk about the Higgs boson because that theory didn't even exist yet. So it has some problems, both in terms of astrological interpretation and also fitting the description. Also, it's worth noting, even when Kepler did use the theory, he purposely knew, well, I shouldn't say purposely knew, he knew it didn't actually match the actual theory. He was saying that to get this to really work, the conjunctions need to take place in what's called a fiery sign. All the constellations of the zodiac, all the zodiac signs are associated with elements. And when the conjunctions are taking place in a fiery sign, that's supposed to be when they're really powerful. But the conjunctions took place in the constellation of Pisces, the fish. Does that sound fiery to you? Not to the ancients either, because that's a fish. So he basically said, well, the conjunctions took place close to the edge between Pisces and Aries. Aries is a fiery sign, so close enough. And that happens a lot in astrology. All these exacting signs, all these great predictions, and then at the last moment, close enough, screw it.
Wow. So this gets into that whole hypothesis of Jesus being the age of Pisces, etc. Like it all ties into this idea. I mean, it seems astronomy really did play a role. You're just pointing out as a scientist how accurate or inaccurate these things really are. And of course, we're going to dabble into this Star of Bethlehem. So, okay, I'm tracking. Yeah. I'm tracking. We do have just keep in mind, everybody who's watching. I don't know how many more slides, but when we're done, I will get into your questions.
Let's see, 500 more slides. Don't worry.
Oh, that's it. Okay. So just stick around for another few years, and we'll get through them. And
yeah, maybe we'll get lucky, and by the time this presentation is over, a new supernova will be seen. We actually haven't seen a supernova, naked eye supernova in the sky since 1604. We are way overdue to see something.
Ooh.
So maybe tomorrow, probably not, but maybe. But now I think we need to talk about the theory that unfortunately might have the greatest number of proponents because it's the one you'll see on the History Channel.
Oh my gosh. So ancient aliens, I must admit, when I travel for my construction job, I'd sit in the hotel room and there were a few channels they had on at the hotel room. And one of them was this ancient alien show. And I watched some, they say it's an alien. They showed paintings where it looked like this was a UFO craft going down into the manger or whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah. They've had at least on 2 episodes explicitly saying, perhaps, maybe, is it possible that the Star of Bethlehem was an alien aircraft?
We know it was. Duh.
Yeah. Now, the real thing, though, is the real Jesus actually descended to Earth in 1951. And his name was Klaatu. I have the poster here for the really famous sci-fi film, The Day the Earth Stood Still. And quite honestly, the character Klaatu, he comes from a spaceship. He's died and he's resurrected, and he gives a message of the world to come if humanity doesn't shape up. He's Jesus. They had to change a few things to get past the censors. But yeah, basically, Klaatu comes from heaven. He's Space Jesus. And you also then, of course, know the somewhat famous line that gets used elsewhere, Klaatu Barekta Necto. Or sorry, Klaatu Barada Necto. I need to say that right. Otherwise, Gort will destroy the world.
Isn't that from the Army of Darkness too?
They use it. Yeah. So it's been used and parodied and elsewhere, but the first time it shows up, it's supposed to be a command given to this giant robot called Gort, who basically said if he's not stopped, if he's not given the right command, he will literally destroy the world. Yeah. And so when Klaatu is killed, the female character of the film, I think her name is Nathaniel. I forget the character's name, but she goes to Gort and has to say Klaatu Barada Necto, so that way he doesn't, go on a rampage. Great movie. The remake with Keanu Reeves, not worth the time, unfortunately. Let's stick with the classics. But when it also comes to classics from the mid-20th century, the idea that the Bethlehem star was some sort of UFO starts appearing in the 1960s. There are a few people in the West, in Europe, in America that propose the idea, but one of the large pushes, strangely enough, comes through literal Soviet propaganda. The magazine I'm showing here, this was a magazine called Sputnik. It was a Western-facing periodical that was basically trying to help undermine capitalism and Western culture and things like that. And one of the things that apparently was coming out of the Kremlin was, hey, let's make it so all those religious people look like idiots and actually say and tell them, convince them those gods that you're worshiping are just actually space aliens. So things like Sodom and Gomorrah, that was actually an alien nuclear warhead going off. This was literally coming out of Soviet Russia, and this was one of their techniques to at least try to undermine Western values and Western systems. The most famous, though, example of Soviet propaganda doing this was from the 1980s, where they pushed the idea that the AIDS virus was actually created by the US government to go after African Americans. That was literal Soviet propaganda that was first published in English-speaking sources to then help that conspiracy theory grow around the world.
And people are so prone to conspiracies. That's a crime.
Yeah. And it is worth noting. So, this idea that Russia might be putting out misinformation to, mess with its enemies, nothing new. What's happening right now in Ukraine has been going on for many, many decades. Though it should be noted that it's not like in the West we don't have any of our own propaganda. The Star of Bethlehem has actually been a big part of public science education since at least the 1930s. And I have been a part of that program because of where I worked. I used to work at a planetarium. And this has been a major vehicle for trying to promote science literacy, science enthusiasm in the US since the early 1930s. The first planetarium was actually built in Germany in 1926. And they started first building them in the US starting in 1930, if I remember correctly, with the Adair Planetarium. On the right here, this is a picture of the Hayden Planetarium in New York City. And very early on in American planetaria, they started having these Christmas shows trying to say, hey, here's what the Star of Bethlehem might have been. Here are the candidates, and here's how we can use them to possibly date the birth of Jesus. One thing worth noting, though, is in those presentations, the one thing you won't hear, even a sliver of, is skepticism. They won't say, well, it could be the case that nothing happened because it's a big flopping myth. No. They're going to say, what possibilities could science use to explain this story, rather than say, we have good reason to think it didn't happen. And it's worth noting, by this time, pretty much all Bible scholars had abandoned the idea of actually finding the Star of Bethlehem this way. Pretty much since like the 1830s, that had been falling by the wayside in Germany. But in England, by the end of the 19th century, it was really hard to find any Bible scholar arguing some rationalization to what the story was. And yet it's being promoted by science enthusiasts, by science educators, but also only in the US at first. When these shows were first in Germany, they were just very didactic, just like, here's the night sky, here's how the planets move, just increase basic science literacy, especially for city dwellers who can't see the night sky anymore because of city lighting. The planetarium was built to fix that problem. And when the first planetarium came to the US and they started having shows, no Christmas show, nothing like that. That only started a few years later by one person who went from being a science reporter to a planetarium show presenter. And what was going on in journalism at that time is actually quite striking. I should let you know, we're about to see some data. I'm a data scientist professionally. I got to show you the data. So brace yourself. Here comes a graph. This is my attempt to go through and look at all of the English language journals, newspapers, all the stuff that's like for public consumption, and see how often are they promoting the idea that the Star of Bethlehem, was something that really existed that we can use science to find, or it's a bunch of bupkis. And the interesting thing is, like in the late 19th, early 20th century, most if not all of the stuff coming out in any given decade or half decade was against the Star of Bethlehem existing. If you went to Popular Astronomy magazine at that time, they would have said, nah, didn't happen. If you went to Popular Mechanics, didn't happen. If you were hoping for a New York Times story that would benefit you, no. In fact, there was a several issue story about trying to explain the Star of Bethlehem, not with astronomy, but with astrotheology. Like literally you're reading it and it's like, I'm reading like several issues of Zeitgeist. That's what was being promoted in the literature that time. And then all of a sudden, it switched. And
what do you think? What do you think the reason? Do you think it's in opposition to? So, like when something comes up that's conspiracy theory, let's say, you go to the far extreme. Well, what do you think?
Well, I think the thing that will give us insight is the timing. Because there's two things to note. One, this seems to be primarily an American phenomenon. It is located in our country, the greatest country ever. And it seems to be isolated to a particular time. So you'll notice like the switch happening in the decade 1925 to 1929. I only found one article in that decade or that half decade that was against the Star of Bethlehem being real in popular literature. And that came in early 1925. What happened in the middle of 1925 in the US that might be important to the understanding of science and religion?
That's exactly what Constellation Pegasus was asking. So,
well, I bet we know our history once we see a couple pictures. In the summer of 1925, the trial of the century, or at least of that century, the Scopes monkey trial.
I know monkey.
Unfortunately, we're all monkeys.
I know,
we're all tailless, mangy monkeys.
So is this in that vein of what I'm saying? Like, so here we have science fighting religion. What does religion do? Double down.
Actually, what I'm saying is something quite the opposite happened.
Okay.
Basically, when this trial happened, the fundamentalists looked like idiots. When they put William Jennings Bryan on the stand and the prosecuting attorney, Clarence Darrow, basically made him look like a fool, not just in the newspapers, but this was like also being broadcast on radio. So like around the country, live coming to people's living rooms, fundamentalist readings of the Bible looking ridiculous and anti-science and backward and just making it look like this is, some crazy rural bumpkin sort of stuff. This shouldn't be part of the modern world. On the other hand, though, the worry that scientists and science educators are like, hey, we can't go around and have science look like the antithesis of religion if for no other reason. The people that are scared of this also are the ones providing the funding to the sciences. It's pretty hard to say, hey, we would like taxpayer funds to do our science experiments and also say all those taxpayers are complete idiots for what they believe. How are we going to convince people to still be on board with science? And what really seems to be the case is that the public perception of science being anti-religion or religion being anti-science needed to find some way to reconcile that. So starting in like the late 1920s, the switch goes from this is just a bunch of bumpkin to maybe science and religion can be reconciled and we can use science to show the truth of religion or see that there is truth in it, find some way of finding dialogue between the two. And that literally seems to be in the publication. So there are various publications that would basically say, now, we're not going to tell the audience that there's no evidence for the Star of Bethlehem, but we can bring up some nice, interesting speculations to make it seem, a little bit more tolerable to them. It's really along the lines of, yes, Virginia, there really is a Santa Claus. That seems to be the mentality. And we know it's in part because of this fear of what happened in the monkey trial, because even years later, in meetings amongst like the newspaper editors and the science journalists, they're like, hey, what happened in 1925? We can't let that happen again. We need to make sure that we're not making religious people feel antagonized by science. And I just see a shift in the publication records and the way that science is presented. And it's not because also the people running the planetariums all believe what's going on. There's been actually internal polling of planetarium workers, and most people think the theories that they present aren't real, aren't right. And they, like when they're being interviewed and they give their reasons why, often it's like, well, we don't want to create a fuss. This is an opportunity to make religious people also get to know science better. What other opportunities can you think of to make someone sit down and have a 45-minute science lecture? So you could also say, I talked about the Soviets having propaganda to undermine religion. You could say the Americans are having their own propaganda to promote religion through science in the same sort of way. I should note, though, it's not that like everyone who proposes a Star of Bethlehem as some scientific thing is, lying or being deceptive. Definitely some people really think that they have it, but most of the people that are presenting the theories are mostly presenting it out of inertia, trying not to ruffle feathers, just trying to say it's at least a vehicle to do science education. But if you talk to them, behind closed doors, they'll say, yeah, there's a reason we call the Star of Bethlehem the SOB. And really, it's because if you just read the story, you know that these theories possibly cannot work. Let's go back to our Greek friends. So again, you can choose any translation you want, though I do recommend the one from my book, because I give my own translation to highlight key points. But really, when it comes to understanding the nature of the star, it comes down to not these 12 verses, but just one, just verse 9. And I've color-coded and highlighted the things that are the most important. And the things that stand out is, first, we're told the star, they see it again, it's the same star they've seen before at its rising. And then the star went before them. The term proegen, from the verb proago, this is a term to lead, to lead someone to a destination. And who is it leading? It specifies with the word autos, them. The them is, in this case, the wise men, the only plural mentioned at this point. It leads them until, and then the word I have in orange is one that often doesn't get translated in English. It's a participle for the word to come or to arrive. So what this is saying is the star went before them until it arrived. Where did it arrive? Over the place where the child was. It came to a place and then stopped. It stopped over where the child was. And in particular, this construction in blue, the phrase there is apano u. This construction of apano with a word followed in the genitive is a particular construction to basically say not just above, but like either right on top of or hovering right above. It's the same construction when it talks about Jesus riding on a donkey, when Jesus talks about a city on a hill, when the angel opens the tomb door and then sits on the tomb, same construction. If you want a little bit of distance, if you go to the crucifixion scene, the sign above Jesus's head that says King of the Jews, that's also uses the same construction. So if you don't want it on top of the house that Jesus is in, yeah, it's hovering that far away. This is the normal way that this is constructed. And conversely, I have gone to and looked at all of the astronomical and astrological literature in Greek. These sorts of words and constructions don't exist at all in those books. And when I say at all, I can literally check by using like the equivalent of Google for all of extant Greek texts. And when I look through
DDAG or BDAG, BDAG, like all Greek literature, it uses it the way you're describing it right now, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah. The particular tool I called is the Thesaurus Lingua Greca, which has that search function in it. And when you search through the astronomical, the astrological literature, how often does apano with the genitive show up in terms of something above something on Earth? Never. How often do they use the word proago to talk about the motions of the stars or planets? Never. They have different words that they'll use, for other things. So in particular, the word that they would use if they want to talk about something up in the sky, they'll use the Greek word hooper. It's from where we get our English words hyper and super. So if you want to talk about something up in the sky, that's the word that they will use. Matthew deliberately uses something else. If he uses a different word, he means something different.
This begs the question, and maybe you're going to get to this, of what if I'm already seeing in my head what this might mean. This means this literal star, this bright thing in the sky, is like literally on top of the spot where Jesus would have been in this story, which would have been highly fictional. Look, just looking at that, I mean, I have a visual in my mind of what this would look like. It's not like at some point in the sky, way up there, it just stops, and then they're guessing which house. it is giving you the visual that this is resting on top of wherever they were literally at.
Exactly. And frankly, like I say, if you don't have something marking the right location, you're going to get that scene from Monty Python where you go to the wrong crib and give gifts to the wrong baby. Sort of situation you would expect. And if it is just like high up in the sky directly above, well, which house do you go to? Because it's just above any house in Bethlehem as much as any other. In fact, even if you were back in Jerusalem, also a star would look pretty much direct overhead. The difference in distance you would cover wouldn't make that noticeable enough by the naked eye. You'd have to have extremely good tools that didn't exist back then to even notice. So it can't just be up high in the sky. And again, the Greek construction is definitely not the one you would use. And I literally have gone and read every single ancient commentary I could on the subject in Greek, Latin, early German, English, whatever I could find describing this. And everyone up until the 18th century is like, yo, dog, this be supernatural. The yo, dog actually comes from Thomas Aquinas. That's exactly how he puts it.
Wow.
He doesn't say that exact thing, but in his Summa Theologica, he does also say that the star is supernatural coming to a particular place. Let's just say this much. I found Thomas Aquinas, John Calvin, and Martin Luther all agreeing on the supernatural aspect of this star. If you can get these three guys in a room and agree on anything, it's probably because that's what the Bible actually says.
That is an interesting point. I mean, if it's supernatural, stop looking at natural phenomena to try and explain it. Stop looking at celestial bodies to try and explain it. Stop trying to point at Jupiter or Venus or this or that or a comet or this. That will not explain what we're looking at here. So you're pointing out in all of this so far is you've explored the natural phenomena, you've explored the hypotheses, you've explored endlessly everybody's ideas, and there's going to be more because this religion is still, pushing the idea. There's going to be more people coming. The point is, the story itself tells you it's supernatural. Theologians recognize it's supernatural. It's not natural phenomena explaining this. So,
exactly, yes. But like I say, people still attempt. So, astronomers to look at the Greek and try to explain it to mean something else. And then I found out, these astronomers can't read Greek for the life of them. I literally came across one book. It was from a Hungarian astronomer who used to work at the Vatican. He was a Jesuit, and he was trying to explain the meaning of word in red, proaging. And he said, we know it to mean something about retrograde motion of planets because it's in the aorist imperfect tense. And when I read that, I was like, what? Those are two different aspects of tense, which mean the exact opposite thing. To be in the aorist is to mean a perfect aspect. And if you're imperfect, you're not perfect. It's literally saying it's the perfect imperfect tense, the round square tense. And I realized these people don't know anything. And they're going to tell the theologians they're misreading the Bible? Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. No, no, no. So a lot of what I had to do in my my book on this subject was basically go word by word and say, hey, this is what it actually means. And the people who have said otherwise, this is why they're wrong. And often I'm not even the first person to say that. There have been others who'd gone through and said, hey, no, this isn't what the words mean. It's like, this is even the same word. Hey, you made a typo here. Hey, this isn't even a real tense you're talking about. And let me just also give a little bit of justification for my translation. So back in 2014, a year after my book came out, I was part of a conference at the University of Groningen. And the results of that conference were put into this book from Brill. And because it's Brill, if you get it in hardcover, you have two options. You can either buy the book or you can pay rent. But one of the authors in here might Annette Mertz. She lived the book on the historical Jesus with Geert Thiessen. It's literally, the book is called The Historical Jesus. And in her contribution to this, she basically cited my analysis of the Greek to say, yep, here's what it actually says. And boy, oh boy, did that make me feel good.
Wow. Yeah. So you had it clarified from someone who's a linguistic academic on that.
Yeah. And there's another expert in that novel, I shouldn't say novel, sorry. Another expert in this volume as well. His expertise is Hellenistic and Roman era astrology and astrological texts. And he also goes through like word by word and comes to the same conclusions I do. This isn't what you find in astrological text. Hey, this is clearly supernatural in its formation. hey, nobody talks about this in any naturalistic way back then, and everyone in antiquity interpreted this story as literally out of this world. So I ain't alone in this. I'm basically just saying what theologians have been saying for millennia.
Dude, that's awesome.
But
at least you're validated on that. So,
oh yeah. But now it still does leave the question, okay, this is the story, we have it. How did it come to be? What is our author trying to actually say and do with this story? If it isn't historical, how did he come to create it? Did he just have a fever dream and just started writing and it just happened to come out into words? Or was there something a little bit smarter to it? And the wonderful thing about this exploration is actually seeing the underlying genius of the author. And when you stop treating him like an idiot who doesn't understand astronomy, but actually understand him as a literary auteur, then you can actually see what he's trying to do. And in particular, this idea of leading stars, taking you to certain destinations, this was actually a relatively common trope at this time. There were many other like Greek figures that were said to have been led by stars on their missions to various places to have successful conquests. But probably the most important example of this comes from the founding myth of Rome itself. In the story of Aeneas fleeing Troy and then eventually coming to the Italian peninsula to ultimately found the city of Rome, and then from there the Roman Republic, and from there the Roman Empire. The most famous version of this, of course, is in Virgil's Aeneid. And in that story, it has the fleeing Trojans for a sign, praying for some help to guide them on their way to some new homeland where they can, be safe away from those barbarous Greeks that had, kicked them out of Troy. And lo and behold, a star comes like crashing through, shooting overhead in the treetops level, shooting from east to west to act as their signal. We have divine guidance. We have divine help on our destination home, or to our new home. And the thing is, the story that Virgil provides is not original to him. We have later commenters on Virgil and telling us here's what the original myth was. The original story was that Venus, as the morning star, acted as a guide to the Trojans and guided them all the way to Italy. And then once they finally got there, then disappeared and let them, do their conquests. So literal guiding star led by a goddess from east to west to a new kingdom. Sound a little familiar? People coming from east to west to find a new king led by a star.
Yeah, this seems to be a common thing. Or at least it's been used before.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, I'm not the first person to notice this. David Friedrich Strauss had first pointed this out back in the 1830s. But I've at least now come up with one piece of evidence that no one else has noticed. So, I can't prove the connection between the stories in the same way like Dennis MacDonald has done with Homeric epics and the Gospels, but the strategy he uses, I'm able to do with a little bit because we have this interesting 4th century Kento. What a Kento is somebody going through a great volume of works and basically cut and paste out to tell a new story. So this image here on the left is a medieval rendition of a woman by the name of Alfotonia Petita Proba. She is one of the very, very few Christian female authors in the first half millennium of Christianity. And what she did is she retold the story of Jesus only by taking verses from the works of Virgil. It would be like someone trying to say, tell the story of Iron Man, but can only do it from quotes here. It's an impressive literary accomplishment. And the only thing she's allowed to change is proper names. But beyond that, she has to retell the story of Jesus, at least in paraphrase, using quotes lifted from the various works of Virgil, which means you have to have an encyclopedic knowledge of Virgil to know what person to go to have them match together. And the interesting thing is she says very, very little about the birth of Jesus. She says nothing from the Gospel of Luke. She apparently can't find any connection between Luke's infancy gospel and anything from Virgil, but she does the story of the Bethlehem star and the slaughter of the innocents by pulling verses from Virgil. And in particular, what does she pull from Virgil? The story of the guiding star that Aeneas sees taking them to their new homeland. So apparently she could see the connection. And that adds a little bit of evidence that I'm not just some modern making things up.
No.
It's also worth noting the political statement behind this as well, because when Virgil wrote the story, he actually changed it. Originally, it was the morning star Lucifer that was supposed to be the guiding star, but the way he describes this star is something like a comet. And he did this on purpose because he's trying to match this with the comet seen after the death of Julius Caesar. So, for example, on this coin with Caesar Augustus on the backside, the divine Julius, and then we see a star with a kind of a wispy tail up top. That was the soul of Caesar rising to the heaven, being carried by the goddess Venus. So Virgil, in his completely boot-licking propaganda for the Julian dynasty, he's basically changing the story so that way it even has a stronger connection to Julius Caesar and Caesar Augustus. And it seems like then, if Matthew wants to say, but here's our king, this would be the story to try to emulate and usurp. It's worth noting that unlike the Aeneas, who comes to a new place and then, tries conquering, what do the wise men do? They follow a star and not like conquer, they worship. So I think the message is a clever arrangement on the part of Matthew. I don't think I can argue for direct mimesis, but this must be in his cultural background and that he's emulating that in this story. But of course, that's not the whole story. If you want someone like Matthew, who is so obsessed with emulating the Old Testament, you got to find, okay, he's got to have some precedent. He's got to be pulling from something. And almost every Christian commenter from like the 2nd century onward has seen the connection to what is called the star prophecy from the book of Numbers, Numbers 24:17. It's the last given by the prophet Balaam, where he's at first trying to choose, but he gives them blessings. And in the last of those prophecies, he says, a star will rise out of...
Air. Hold on, let him come back. You there, man? Let me know when you're back.
I'm here. I am here.
Okay. You broke up for a second. So, okay, the star prophecy from Numbers 24.
I am here.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I ascended for a minute.
You're fine.
So this was an extremely popular... Okay. Yeah, so this prophecy was widely used. We find it used in multiple of the Dead Sea Scroll documents. We find it used by the Christians when looking back to the story. Probably the most famous example of it being used is in the 130s in the Bar Kokhba rebellion, where Simon Bar Kokhba, his older name was Bar Kokhba, but then to Bar Kokhba, Aramaic for son of the star. Allegedly, Rabbi Akiva also said that he was the fulfillment of this particular prophecy. And we see that he used this sort of imagery on his coins. So like on the coin here, showing a star right above Jerusalem. In later legends, he said that basically, I shouldn't say later legends, it was part of his propaganda that he was literally a star descended from heaven, come to basically bring, conquest against the Romans in favor of the Jews. Now, historically, that didn't happen, but nonetheless, we see that this prophecy over and over.
Aaron, we lost you again.
Used as
we lost you again, brother. Let me know when you're back.
I'm back.
Okay, you're back.
Ooh.
Awesome. Okay, so
Where am I?
Let me tell you where we're at. The star was over, but it failed in terms of Bar Kokhba, and then you were going from there. No. Start over whenever you get this. I think there's a little bit of a lag. Let me make sure we're here.
Okay.
All right. When we see eye to eye, then we know we're good. I got to know that you're here. We're good to go. Everything's good. All right. What's the deal, man? We here?
Okay. I feel like I'm here.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
The internet glitched out. So we think that Satan is trying to interfere. But question, you stopped, well, first things, you stopped Bar Kokhba failed, but they thought the star would symbolize that and their conquest, just like it did with the previous conquest that star myths are aligned with. You were going from there and continuing, and then my question before you continues, how many more slides do we have just so we can get into the super chats and Q&A?
Basically 2. And one
Awesome.
of them has all the content. So I think the background that most literary theories have has been pretty well established. It's agreed by most biblical scholars, but I have been pursuing the idea for a while that perhaps Matthew wasn't the original inventor of this story, that it might have had some sort of interesting background before it came to his desk. So, if he completely invented it, that would be consistent with the way the story comes out. But I've been entertaining the possibility of a prior source because we have all these other early Christian sources that refer to not a star at Jesus's birth, but Jesus as a star. It shows up twice in the book of Revelation. It's mentioned, at least metaphorically, in 2 Peter. And in one of the letters of St. Ignatius, the letter he wrote to the Ephesians, he also basically describes Jesus as a star in the heavens, with all of the other stars in him. So
all the other stars,
there's another version of star story out there. Oh yeah, there's all the other stars in heaven were dancing around the stellar Jesus. The sun, moon, and stars were all singing and praising and dancing about the Jesus star.
Got it.
And so it makes me wonder, could it be that Matthew has some sort of prior source? There's things that seem to indicate that. And if it's the case, and he is still being a literary genius, but he's a literary genius working with a prior, perhaps even more fantastical story. Some sort of early Christian mystery. But I'll have to say that for another time.
Your trip. Yeah, I'm like, what is this mystery? All right, so I'm going to go up to these super chats then, and we're going to get everybody's questions. I hope your internet can hold up. I don't know what's going on, man. You're not the only one. Recently, I think
it's okay. It should be okay. I guess, somebody in the same neighborhood just decided to download all of the Wikipedia all at once, maybe.
Maybe, I don't know. I just know that it's been difficult lately. Most of my guests have been having this lately. I don't know what it is. Their internet just isn't keeping up with, and I even turned down our quality to try and make this work because we were having hiccups at the beginning. So we're just jumping into this. This is the one we already got with Dr. Romanot, Roman response to Persian political. Okay. DBR, thank you for the super
I
sticker,
should probably respond to him more fully, though.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, he is absolutely right. Imagine the political situation, because the Persian Magi coming, they're not just like your neighborhood pastor. These guys are actually part of the Persian government. They are literally officials that help choose the next king of the Persian Empire. So having them come to another territory, a Roman-controlled territory, and telling that person, you don't control things anymore, you are basically not just usurping Herod, super paranoid guy already. These are Augustus. And yet the historical record was just like nothing happened.
You're breaking out, man. You're breaking out.
This was only something.
You there?
Oh.
Yeah.
I need more internet.
I know. Let me ask you this. Are you hardwired, by the way? Are you plugged directly in?
No, I only have a Wi-Fi connection. I don't have the ability to plug in with my computer.
You don't have an Ethernet?
Yeah. Actually, hold on for one moment.
I'm just, from now on, we'll want to, I got to start making sure everybody's Ethernet connected, because I know that Wi-Fi just isn't cutting it these days. Yeah, you're like you look like just
I literally
moments
can't
you're
do that with my
blurry.
computer. It's too thin for an Ethernet port. Oh, that's probably for the best. Nobody wants to see this.
I'm trying, man. I'm trying. Yeah, no.
Right. All right.
So did you want to pick up where you left off? Do you know
No
where you
worries.
left
No
off?
worries. Yeah, I actually can't plug into an Ethernet wire. My computer doesn't have the thickness. Yeah. So yeah, I was telling for Doc Bromo that yes, he's right. If the Magi came, it would have been basically a declaration of war between the Persian and the Roman Empire. And the Magi themselves weren't actually astrologers at this time. In fact, at this time, from what we can tell from Zoroastrian literature, they were anti-astrology. The motions of the stars, they thought, would be a sign of evil forces in the universe. The motions of the planets were actually due to Ehrman, the Persian version of Satan. So if they saw a star moving around, they wouldn't have said, let's follow that. They would have said, oh no, the devil is here.
Interesting.
So
Very
yeah,
interesting.
makes no cultural or political sense.
Thank you for that. DBR, thank you for the super sticker, my friend. Appreciate the support. Did not see a question. Scrolling down. Constellation Pegasus in the house. In the hizzy. Where did the gospel writers get this idea from? Just got here. And this is actually what you went into in your presentation, I believe, where you were talking about Matthew, at least, is pulling from the Hebrew Bible in some respects. But would you say it's only that, or you think it's both? It's in the air. These ideas are floating around that people are following stars and things like that.
Yeah, in particular, the idea of guiding stars or guiding lights. That's a pretty common trope in Greco-Roman literature. And then, of course, there's the Jewish equivalent of the pillar of fire that led the Jews to the Holy Land. So that sort of trope would have existed even without trying to do direct emulation. So that's a big part of it. But like I say, I've also been exploring the idea that there might have also been some earlier version of this story. And as a shout out next week on Gnostic Informant, we'll be discussing my hypothesis of what that might have been.
Aaron, you know what I'm going to do? Because it's glitching bad. And we got most... Okay, see, it automatically kicked him out. Let me call him so we can at least verbally fix this problem. That way there's no cutting out.
Hello, I hear you.
Hey, much, much better if I probably just do the audio. If you want to mute yourself on the show, just in case. I mean, if your visuals might come in, might come out, but at least we can hear you. And you just stay muted on that, and then you can take the answers here this way. That way we don't end up having any problem.
All right, sounds good. How's my audio coming in? I probably sound a little bit...
No, I think you're pretty good. Let me ask everybody. Say yes if his audio's coming through really well. Let me know if it's coming through good. Just give me a yes in the chat, everybody, so we can get through these questions. Just want to make sure everybody's happy. So, all right, I'm waiting for some responses because, there's a slight delay.
Right.
So we have yes, yes, yes. Right. So it looks like so far, I mean, that's pretty good. Was it 2 or 3 witnesses? I'm just kidding. That doesn't always work out right. From what I understand, Jehovah's Witnesses have a horrible system when it comes to that. Rape victims, all that stuff. Anyway, Doc Pluromana, why do the great twins have such overriding significance in Jewish astrological traditions? A redefined Babylonian Sedek into Jewish Kittu cosmology? Couple
Great
words.
twins. So there seems to be some combinations here I'm not able to put together well. So like when I hear the twins, I think of like Castor and Pollux, who were sons of Zeus, and the constellation Gemini. They're usually called the twins. So this one with Sedek and Kittu, and Sedek is usually a Hebrew word for like righteous. It's also the word for Jupiter. So I'm trying to put a few things together. And as for Jewish astrological traditions, it also depends on what time you mean. So at the time of Jesus and the early Christians, there really didn't seem to be a really scientific astrological tradition. We see in the Dead Sea Scrolls they were doing something like horoscopes, but it doesn't look necessarily the same as we find among the Greeks and Romans. In the Talmud, there's debates about the efficacy of astrology, if it has anything to do with the Jews or if it's even real at all. Now later, there are many Jews that will become some of the most important astrologers at that time. And again, other Jews will say it's a bunch of bupkis. In particular, Moses Maimonides, one of the most famous medieval rabbis, wrote this extensive letter to the Jews of Yemen who thought that the signs were indicating the Messiah was coming in their midst. And Maimonides wrote to them and basically said, hey, I did the math. So first off, the people telling you that there's going to be this great alignment in the sky, they don't know what they're talking about. And even if they did, if this astrological stuff were true, then the Jews would still be in Egypt. It basically just tears apart the entirety of astrology. And this was roughly 1,000 years ago. So, and then later there are other Jews who are very big into astrology, others who attack it. Christians would be the same way. Some Christians totally into astrology and will practice it. Others say it's of the devil.
Yeah.
It'd be complicated, but for this particular question, I'm not 100% how to answer it with more precision.
Okay.
Doc, you're always making us look like the dummies. You should be the one on the show.
Yeah, Doc. Yeah, Doc. What the heck, Doc? Thank you for that super chat, my friend in question. Gnostic informant Neil. If you haven't subscribed, you're going to hell. Okay. Tell us about Caesar's comet and how it plays into his apotheosis.
Yeah. So on the Ides of March 44 BC, Caesar has a bit of a stabbing motion into his body several times.
I wonder what that was.
Yeah. I think somebody didn't like his salad dressing, so that was the complaint. I think that's what it was.
That makes sense.
So he dies. He becomes a martyr for the many folks. There's division within the empire, and you basically get two camps: the people who are totally on Caesar's side, like Mark Antony and Caesar's adopted son Octavian, and then of course you have his assassins, and other people who are like, okay, I don't want to get in the middle of this. I don't want another civil war. What if we get another civil war anyways? But one of the things that was prepared by the pro-Caesarians were games in the honor of Julius Caesar, and early on in those games, there was a new star being seen in the sky. It was a little bit ambiguous what it was being seen as. From what we can do to reconstruct its orbit, it looks like the tail of that comet that was going by might have been pointing more or less directly at Earth, so you couldn't see a comet tail swooshing out. So depending on whose side you're on, if you were pro-Caesar, you said, oh, this is a new star. And if you were anti-Caesar, you said it was a comet, because comets were almost always bad news. In particular, there was a astrologer in the Forum at the time who, when he saw the comet, said, this is terrible. This is the end. This is a new terrible age, and commit suicide right in the Forum to emphasize how bad the future is going to be. Now, you can't just let a bad prophet, say those sorts of things and say, terrible stuff. How do you take a prophecy and fix it? Well, if Jeremiah had a bad prophecy, you need yourself a Daniel to reinterpret it. And guess what? The pro-Caesarians were able to find, allegedly, the Sibylline oracle, and she reinterpreted this to say, oh, this new age is a new golden age, a new age of the sun beginning. So this is, a great glorious time to be here. And the Sibylline oracle was also supposed to be like this immortal being with, prophetic powers from Apollo. But because she was immortal, she still ages, so she gets smaller and smaller. So at the time of the Caesars, allegedly, so she was so small that she would fit into a little glass jar.
Oh my gosh. Oh. Thank you so much for that. Doc Pluroma back. Are Christians overthinking that Matthew had knowledge of some other tale about a morning star, Revelation 2:28, 2 Peter 1:19?
So that's one of the hypotheses that I've been actually exploring as maybe the background that Matthew is using. So in particular, one of the phrases that is used by Matthew has had a fair bit of debate about its intention. So in verse 2 and in verse 9, the star is referred to as having been seen ente anaxole. Again, in older translations, it's usually rendered as in the east. More modern ones will say at the rising. And the reason there's that ambiguity is that the word anatole can refer to both. Where do the stars rise? They rise in the east. So the word for rising and east is the same term. So there is that ambiguity there. But also, if a star is rising, well, when is it rising? Is it rising at midnight, or is it rising just before sunrise, and so making it a morning star? And I'm going to argue at a later point, show some of the evidence that I think exists that would indicate maybe the best interpretation is that means the star of Jesus was a morning star. So then that does beg the question, Jesus was the morning star. Here is the morning star at Jesus' birth. That doesn't look random. There looks to be a connection. And what that is, I'm going to be discussing with Neil next week.
Interesting. So you're going to have to go subscribe to Gnostic Informant. So definitely go do that. Fire Sabers, thank you for that super sticker, my friend. I really appreciate the support. Hey, what were those 3 words again? The 3 magical words I was telling you about that's in Army of Darkness?
Oh, Klaatu, I think in Army of Darkness, they slightly changed it to Klaatu, Verada, Nikto.
Let me play it just because I want people to feel. And if you don't know this movie, you must figure it out. Let me play this beginning just to show you how funny it is. Here we go.
Ooh, wait a minute. The words. Right. Say the words. Klaatu, Verada. Hey, wait a minute. Everything's cool.
The Celestial Code of... Okay, so that's a whole different episode. I had to, man. I had to.
I know. I should also note, just because I'm connected to it, so the Evil Dead movie is made by Sam Raimi, Michigan State graduate, so, go green, go white. I have to pull out some college pride for that.
Uh-oh. Okay. Let me get this next super chat here. Sid Dave in the hizzy. Thank you, Sid, for that big 20, my friend. I really appreciate the support. Gospels make so many arguments on genealogy, star in Bethlehem, virgin birth to somehow convince you that Jesus is the Messiah. However, none of these arguments were made or evidence shown to the Sanhedrin when Jesus was alive. And just so they can see your face while you're responding up.
Yeah. So let me first try to address that from the point of view of a believing Christian, that even if they presented these sorts of things during the trial, do we think the Sanhedrin would have cared or believed it? It's like, you claim that you're a descendant of David. You got the paperwork, you got the birth certificate. No, well, we're not going to believe that. But on the other hand, if there really was some miraculous star seen in the sky, it seems like it should have been remembered, because also it's noted in Matthew chapter 2, it said when the Magi arrived that Herod was troubled and all of Jerusalem with him, which means everyone knew what was going on. So that, 30 years later, everyone is completely forgotten, even though this was something that was supposed to have set off, the entire city, the political leadership. It led to the king to also slaughter babies in another town, and everyone just forgot. Yeah, that does seem implausible.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that super chat, Sid. David the Goliath, thank you for the super chat. If God wanted to send his son to die for human sins, then what was the whole point of making a covenant with Jews and sending Moses, Abraham? Just make Jesus Eve's son and resurrect him after his death.
Oh, well, someone is a better project manager than the Almighty.
Yes, David the Goliath, you are. I really appreciate that. No, it's one of those common sense questions you kind of ask yourself as you're deconverting too. You're like, man, could have done a lot better with this whole thing. Like, there's probably way better ways to do it. But then, of course, if you deal with someone who just can't let it go, they'll go, you don't know that because you're not all knowing. And if you knew what God knows, then you wouldn't do, come on.
Yeah. In fact, we could even take it a step back. Why not actually have Jesus die and come back from the dead before God even makes Adam? Take care of all the sin stuff even before the first sin. It's like, take care of the problem before it even starts.
You kind of wonder if Revelation is hinting at that. The Lamb who was slain before the foundation of the world. I'm sure it's open for interpretation, but it makes you wonder,
Yeah. I've looked at that a bunch of times, just trying to figure out what's best. My reading of that is more like he was sacrificed, and the plan was set since the foundation, but it was, recent events that the events actually took place, or at least it was recently revealed. But it's indeed ambiguously written, and it doesn't help that the person who wrote Revelation doesn't have the best Greek.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That is absolutely true. I'm 100% with you. Okay, so just for everybody's clarification, what do they get when they get this book? I want people to go get it. Please go support Dr. Ehrman Adair and check out the skeptical view on the Star of Bethlehem. There's going to be a lot more. You have learned more as well since then. I do want to do a follow-up episode as well, go deeper into this. But what do they get if they get the book? What is it that you're pretty much guaranteeing?
Well, the most important thing is you're going to actually connect to the universe as it really is. You're going to find out that we, as Carl Sagan put it, we are a way for the cosmos to know itself. And you also know why the various arguments put out there aren't so great. I go through what the theories entail, the basics of what the objects are involved, a little bit of the science behind it, but also a big chunk of, how these sorts of stories were created. I go into, arguments about literary genre and where this infancy story fits, that it's actually not so similar to history. It actually has more in common, I find, with novels of the period, in particular Jewish novels. It has a lot of the features that one would expect from that kind of literature, as opposed to, straightforward gospel truth history. And like I say, it also comes along with a little bit of explanation. So the various terms that might be unknown. So like, what's a zodiac? What's a right ascension? I have like a glossary in there. I have my own translation, a few other small fun facts here and there. Strangely enough, I was able to reference Queen much more often than I would have thought. The band Queen.
Yeah.
Just so people actually know, the former bassist of Queen, Brian May, earned his PhD in astrophysics just about 10 years ago.
What?
Yeah, he was actually working on his thesis work when he basically said, hey, we're going to go form a band, and then dropped that. Came back to his research, found out basically no one had been working on the same subject he was, updated his thesis a bit, and was able to publish. And he's basically the expert on something called zodiacal light. It's basically the reflection of sunlight on the leftover dust in the solar system.
Wow, that's a cool coin term, though, to use. I want everyone watching, obviously, if you didn't watch the very beginning, to know that Ehrman Adair is a physics PhD from the Ohio State University. So he knows what he's talking about scientifically. He's all over this. So definitely worth checking him out. His website is in the description as well. Let me get this final super chat from David the Goliath here. The gospel writers made a big mistake by making up the virgin birth story. What is the point of this miracle which can never be seen and can never be verified?
Oh, but you can verify it with the eye of faith.
Yeah. You start to wonder if the eye of faith is a written story where people are just trying to convince you, and then you are convinced because you believe what's being written in a story. That's starting to become the thing, or just testimony of people who told the story, and then others believe it. Yeah, that's faith, baby. That's what I'm beginning to think of. They know these stories. If they write it, it's like what you talk about, propaganda from Russia, right? That is throwing out propaganda. They know people who are conspiracy nuts will fall for it and go out and spread it, and people will believe it. So it's almost like, well, if you write this as clever as you wrote this and as convincing, the ball might get started. It starts rolling downhill. That's what I think might be going on here.
There's definitely some of that, because the idea from Plato that you need to tell a lie for the greater good of some sort. Sprinkle in something that's not quite right, but it'll get them in the right direction. And as I've mentioned, among planetarium workers, they're promoting something that they don't think is actually real, but figure it's better to not rock the boat, and they at least get the opportunity to educate an audience on some science topics. So, yeah, that idea, that strategy is alive and well in this world. I do also want to note one other thing with the super chat as well about the virgin birth. There is also the tension in Matthew. How does one combine the virgin birth and the whole, descent from David if at the very last moment you get to Joseph as a descendant of David, but but he has genetically nothing to do with the birth of Jesus.
Right. Yeah.
And I at least, figure the author is smart enough to also see that contradiction. He couldn't have just written that down and then just said, somebody else would figure it out. I think what he might be doing also shows his Greco-Roman influence, because in that culture, especially in Roman culture, if you were adopted, you're basically equal to a flesh and blood relative.
Yeah.
So I think what Matthew might be doing is trying to be clever to actually get Jesus within the Davidic lineage, but also separate him because he's also from the same lineage from, I'm forgetting which Jewish king it was, but in Chronicles it says like his line will be cursed, like everyone of his descendants will be cursed. But if that's where the descendant of David is supposed to come from, how do you reconcile that? Oh, Jesus is not a blood descendant, but an adopted descendant, so he is Davidic, but without having the blood taint. So I think he's trying to be clever this way.
Wow, that is interesting, because that's something this book I have right here. This one right here gets into it. Jews and the Roman rivals, and she's explaining how pagan Rome influenced and impacted the thinking of the Jews. This is before Christianity, which I find, for my own issues that I'm arguing with certain people who have certain ideas, I find that very relevant to understanding, like, it wasn't Christianity. Like, sure, that did change things, and you see pagan Rome turn Christian, but pagan Rome impacted Jewish thought more than people realize, which would be where you maybe see this, what we see with the Gospels and what's going on in the New Testament with this adoption idea, especially when you're calling non-Israelites Abraham's descendants. Like, how do you do that? You're not a descendant. How are you a descendant? Adoption. That makes a lot of sense, especially when Paul uses that term multiple times. So there's a lot of stuff, Yeah,
and it's the only way I can be thinking of how to make Matthew at least consistent with himself. If I can read him and figure, okay, he's intelligent, he's probably at least self-consistent. He's not going to be consistent with Luke. I'm not going to even try that. But he's not going to trip over his own shoelaces as far as I'm concerned.
Interesting way of looking at it. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much, audience, for checking us out. Sorry we had technical difficulty here, but if you made it this far, you're chosen. You're going straight through. Don't even worry about passing through purgatory. We got you. We got you. We got a wash-off station once you get in here, though, so don't worry. We'll purge those sins. I do want everybody to please go check out his book. Go check out his website. Once again, I cannot brag enough about the work that he's doing, and we need to have more, even if it's just to ask me anything, hang out with Dr. Aaron Adair, and we can go into anything science, whatever you guys want to do. We definitely plan on doing that, so go show him some love. Is there any other plugs other than your website and your book that you share?
I'll just repeat again that I'll be appearing next week to talk a bit more related to this subject with Neil. And of course, I think you have a Patreon that we should all be supporting and funding because of the great work you do here.
Oh, thank you, my friend. Yeah, I try to plug it as much as I can and work very hard at trying to do that. And I'm going to be bringing more stuff. In fact, Neil's editing a video right now that I recorded today on, it's kind of the evolution of the pantheon of Greek deities, but also it gets down into the Gospel of John that I just thought was really interesting with Jesus, the I am statements from Jesus. And there are definitely Greek or Greco-Roman gods. Every I am statement is just making him better than anything that would have been in that culture, from Demeter to Dionysus, you name it. So there's a lot of cool stuff coming. And any final words? Before we get to baby Jesus and, of course, the Life of Brian scene.
Right. I have always found that the best way to have any sort of apotheosis is to look up at the heavens. If you can, get out of town, go to a dark place and look up at a beautiful night sky. That is perhaps the best way I can think of to truly connect to heaven and earth and see its vastness and our place in it.
Well put. I plan on doing that maybe when I go to Israel with Neil. I think Dr. Tabor said he has a spot he wants to take us. And he's like, we'll lay down and we'll look up and so I don't know. He's like, this is going to be an awesome experience. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you again to the audience, everybody who's been supportive, showing love, giving a thumbs up, sharing this content, commenting in the chat, super chatting, everything, all the above. Never forget, we are MythVision.
Go and pray someone else's brat. Go on.
We were led by a star.
Led by a bottle of all I got out.
Well, we must see him. We have brought presents.
Out.
Gold, frankincense, myrrh.
Well, why didn't you say he's over there?
Dear tiny Jesus, your golden fleece diapers with your tiny little fat balled up fist
He
pawing
was a man. He had a beard.
Look, I like the baby version the best. Do you hear me?
Dear 8 pound, 6 ounce, newborn infant Jesus. Don't even know a word yet. Just little infant, so cuddly, but still omnipotent.
We just thank you for all the races I've won and the